You were born into suffering, and everything you do to escape it only makes it worse. Every desire you chase, every goal you set, every moment you spend trying to feel better is just another turn of the wheel that grinds you down. Schopenhauer saw through this trap 200 years ago, and what he discovered is both terrifying and liberating. Because buried in his brutally honest philosophy about why life is pain, he found something unexpected. Not a cure, but an escape hatch. A way to step outside the machine, even if just for a moment. And it has nothing to do with success or happiness or any of that nonsense they've been selling you. Look, I know you're tired. Tired of the grind, tired of pretending that if you just work a little harder or buy the right thing or fix yourself in the right way, everything will finally feel okay. Your most engaged viewers have told me exactly this. One of you put it perfectly. I know all of this and I hate the system that makes us slaves, but we have no choice because we have to pay our bills. The slaves have 3 options, you said. Suicide, slave work, or crime. And you're right to be looking for something better, because all 3 of those options are just different flavors of the same poison. This isn't going to be a short video. This is a deep dive. 2.5 hours where we're going to explore one of the most important philosophical discoveries ever made. A discovery about suffering, about consciousness, about what it means to be trapped in existence, and how you might, just might, find moments of genuine freedom. We're going to understand why Arthur Schopenhauer, this angry German philosopher that most people have never heard of, figured out something that could actually save your life. Not metaphorically, actually. By the time we're done, you're going to understand the logic of suffering, why it's built into the structure of existence itself, why you can't think your way out of it or achieve your way out of it or love your way out of it, and more importantly, you're going to understand the one thing that actually works. The escape hatch that's been sitting in front of you your whole life, that you've used without even knowing what you were doing. We're going to make it conscious. We're going to make it deliberate. We're going to give you a tool that actually functions in the real world, not some positive thinking garbage that falls apart the second things get hard. This first part is about understanding the prison. You can't escape something if you don't know what's holding you. So we're going to start with the man himself, Arthur Schopenhauer, because his life explains a lot about his philosophy. Then we're going to dive deep into his central concept, the thing he called the will. And finally, we're going to understand exactly how the will creates suffering, necessarily, in every moment you're alive. This is going to be dark. But stick with me, because the darkness is the only honest starting point. Everything else is just people lying to make you feel better temporarily. Let's begin. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 inches, what's now Gdansk, Poland, but was then the free city of Danzig. His father was a wealthy merchant, successful, pragmatic, the kind of man who believed in business and money and the real world. His mother was Johanna Schopenhauer, who became a somewhat famous novelist in her time. And right from the start, young Arthur didn't fit. He was moody, difficult, saw through people's pretenses in a way that made them uncomfortable. His father wanted him to become a merchant. Schopenhauer tried it, hated every second, and when his father died, possibly by suicide, though that's debated, Arthur finally had the freedom and the inheritance to do what he actually wanted. Study philosophy. He went to university, studied under some of the big names of German idealism, and immediately realized he thought they were mostly full of it. See, this was the era of Hegel and Fichte, philosophers who were building these massive, optimistic systems, where history was progressing toward reason and spirit was unfolding toward perfection, and everything meant something. Schopenhauer looked at the actual world, the world of pain and death and meaningless suffering, and thought these guys were delusional. He said Hegel's philosophy was empty word juggling, philosophical charlatanism. He wasn't diplomatic about it, so Schopenhauer went his own way. He read voraciously. He discovered ancient texts on Buddhism and Hinduism that were just starting to be translated into European languages, and something clicked. Here were philosophies that took suffering seriously. That didn't pretend life was basically good, with some unfortunate rough patches. That started from the premise that existence itself is the problem. This resonated with something deep in Schopenhauer's own experience, because by all accounts, Schopenhauer was not a happy man. He was paranoid, kept loaded pistols by his bed because he was convinced someone would break in and kill him. He had terrible relationships with women, including his own mother, who basically told him he was unpleasant to be around. He never married, lived alone with a succession of poodles, all of which he named the same thing. He was bitter about his lack of recognition, his books didn't sell well during most of his lifetime, and he spent decades watching lesser philosophers, in his opinion, get all the fame and attention while his work was ignored. But here's the thing, that bitterness, that darkness, that refusal to pretend everything was fine, it made him see clearly. He wasn't invested in believing the world was good. He didn't need to convince himself that life had inherent meaning, or that people were basically noble, or that hard work led to happiness. He could look at existence without rose-colored glasses and report back honestly about what he saw. And what he saw was suffering. Everywhere. In everything. Built into the structure of being itself. His major work, The World as Will and Representation, was published in 1818 when he was just 30 years old. It's a massive, dense book that nobody bought. The first edition barely sold any copies. Publishers kept remaindering it. Schopenhauer was crushed. But he also knew he'd written something true and important. He spent the rest of his life expanding on it, defending it, waiting for the world to catch up, and eventually, toward the end of his life, it did. He became famous, influential, read by artists and musicians and writers who recognized something in his philosophy that spoke to their experience. Wagner loved him. Nietzsche was obsessed with him before eventually breaking away. Freud acknowledged his influence. Tolstoy, Proust, Thomas Mann, they all read Schopenhauer and found something there that the optimists couldn't provide. Schopenhauer died in 1860, finally recognized, finally vindicated, but still fundamentally alone. And his philosophy is, in a weird way, a philosophy of aloneness. Of individual consciousness trapped in a body that wants things, trying to make sense of existence that doesn't make sense. But before we get too deep into the emotional tone, we need to understand the actual structure of his thought. We need to understand the will. So, what is the will? This is the foundation of everything Schopenhauer believed. And it's easy to misunderstand, so let me be really clear about what he meant and what he didn't mean. When Schopenhauer talks about the will, he's not talking about your personal willpower. He's not talking about the thing you use to resist eating a donut or get yourself to the gym. That's will with a lowercase w, individual volition. Schopenhauer is talking about something much bigger, much more fundamental. He's talking about the thing in itself. The ultimate reality that underlies all existence. He's talking about the force that makes everything happen, the will with a capital W. Here's the basic idea. When you look at the world, you see objects, trees, rocks, other people, your own body. You see things that seem separate, distinct, existing in space and time. This is what Schopenhauer calls representation. It's the world as it appears to you, filtered through your perception, organized by your mind into categories like space and time, and cause and effect. This is the world of phenomena, appearances. It's real in the sense that you actually experience it. But it's not the ultimate reality. It's reality as it appears to a conscious subject. But beneath the appearance, beneath the representation, there's something else. There's the thing that's actually doing the existing. And Schopenhauer says this thing, this fundamental reality, is will. It's not matter. It's not mind. It's not God. It's will. Blind, purposeless, endless striving. The impulse to exist, to persist, to want. And everything is will. The rock is will expressing itself as rockness. The tree is will expressing itself as treeness. The animal is will expressing itself as animal hunger and reproduction and survival. And you, your will too. Your body is will, objectified, made visible. Every organ, every cell, every biological process is the will manifesting in physical form. Your heart beats because the will wills it. You get hungry because the will wills it. You want sex because the will wills it. You're not in control. You're a puppet of this fundamental force. Now, Schopenhauer got this idea partly from Kant, who talked about the thing in itself, the reality behind appearances that we can never fully know. But Kant said we can't know what the thing in itself is. Schopenhauer said no, we can know it. We know it directly, intimately, because we are it. When you feel desire, when you feel your body moving, when you feel yourself wanting to live and continue existing, you're experiencing the will from the inside. You're not just observing it, you're being it. And this is crucial. The will isn't rational. It doesn't have purposes or goals. It's not trying to achieve anything, it just is. It's the endless, groundless striving to exist. Like a current in a river that flows not because it's trying to get somewhere, but because that's what currents do. The will wills. That's all. There's no why. There's no grand plan. It's just this dumb, blind force, pushing everything to keep existing, to keep wanting, to keep striving. Think about your own body for a second. You didn't decide to be born. You didn't choose to have desires. You don't control your heartbeat or your digestion or your immune system. These things happen automatically, driven by biological imperatives that existed long before you were conscious and will continue after you're dead. That's the will working through you. You experience it as your body's needs, your urges, your survival instincts. But it's not really yours. It's the will using you as a vehicle. And it's the same will in everything. The will that makes you hungry is the same will that makes a plant grow toward light. The will that makes you want sex is the same will that makes animals reproduce. The will that makes you fear death is the same will that makes every living thing cling to existence. It's one thing, expressing itself in countless forms, but fundamentally it's unified. And 70, their will that makes you fear death is the same will. And their will that makes you fear death is the same will that makes you fear death is the same will that makes you fear death. It's the same blind striving in everything. Schopenhauer uses this image. Imagine the will as a massive underground force, like magma beneath the Earth's surface. And all the individual things in the world, all the plants and animals and people, were like vents where that force breaks through. We look different on the surface. We have different shapes and behaviors, but underneath we're all expressions of the same thing. The same pointless, endless energy pushing to exist. This is already pretty dark, but it gets worse, because if the will is just blind striving with no purpose, and you are the will, then your life is also purposeless striving. You exist because the will exists. You want because the will wants. But there's no goal. There's no point where you'll be satisfied and the striving will stop. The will doesn't stop. It can't stop. Stopping would be non-existence, and the will is precisely the force that resists non-existence. So you're stuck in this body, driven by desires you didn't choose, striving for things that won't actually fulfill you, because the striving itself is the point, not the achievement. Not the satisfaction, the striving, the endless, restless, unsatisfiable wanting. And this brings us to the core of Schopenhauer's pessimism, the reason he's so dark. The reason he says life is suffering. Because if the will is endless wanting, and you are the will, then your existence is endless wanting, and wanting is suffering. Let's break this down carefully, because this is the logic that makes everything else make sense. What is desire? Desire is lack. When you want something, it means you don't have it. There's a gap between your current state and the state you want to be in. That gap is uncomfortable. It's a kind of pain. Maybe mild, maybe intense, but it's always some form of suffering. Hunger is the suffering of not having food. Loneliness is the suffering of not having connection. Ambition is the suffering of not having achieved what you want to achieve. Every desire is a lack, and every lack hurts. So first principle, wanting is suffering. Now, what happens when you get what you want? Let's say you're hungry and you eat. You wanted food, now you have it. Are you satisfied? Sure. For a while, the desire is gone, the lack is filled, the suffering stops, but it doesn't last. A few hours later, you're hungry again. The desire returns, the suffering returns. The satisfaction was temporary. Or take something bigger. You want money because you think it'll make you secure. You work, you grind, you finally get some money. Does the desire go away? No. Now you want more money, or you want the things money can buy, or you're afraid of losing the money you have. The desire just shifts. It doesn't end. Or love. You want to be loved, so you chase it. Maybe you find someone beautiful, except now you're afraid they'll leave, or they don't love you exactly the way you want. Or the initial intensity fades, and you're left wondering if this is really it. The desire for love becomes the fear of losing love, becomes the disappointment that love isn't what you imagined. The suffering continues, just in different forms. This is what Schopenhauer observed. Satisfaction is always temporary. The moment you fulfill a desire, either a new desire appears, or the same desire returns, or you realize the thing you wanted doesn't actually make you happy. The will keeps willing. The wanting never stops. Second principle. Satisfaction doesn't end wanting. It just pauses it. But, okay, you might say, what about those moments when you're not actively wanting anything? When you've eaten, you're comfortable, you have no pressing needs. What about then? Schopenhauer has an answer for that too. Boredom. Think about it. When was the last time you had absolutely nothing to do? No desires to chase, no problems to solve, and you felt completely at peace? Probably never. Because when you have nothing to want, you get restless, you get bored. You start looking for something to want, something to do, something to fill the emptiness. You check your phone. You look for entertainment. You create problems to solve, just so you have something to focus on. Boredom, Schopenhauer says, is just suffering without content. It's the will still pushing, still striving, but with no object. It's the raw experience of being a wanting machine with nothing to want, and it's unbearable. People will do almost anything to avoid boredom. They'll create drama, take risks, pick fights, anything to have something to strive toward. So, you're trapped in what Schopenhauer describes as a pendulum. On one side, you have unfulfilled desire, which is suffering. On the other side, you have boredom, which is also suffering. And in the middle, you have brief moments of satisfaction that don't last. You swing back and forth, want, get, bored, want, get, bored, over and over. That's life. Third principle, when you're not suffering from desire, you're suffering from boredom. Now, layer on top of this the fact that bodies decay, people die, you lose everything eventually. Pain is real and unavoidable. And other people are also manifestations of the will competing with you for resources and recognition. Add in disease, disaster, betrayal, disappointment, the gap between what you hope for and what you get. Add in consciousness itself, the burden of being aware enough to know you're trapped, to anticipate suffering, to remember past pain and fear future pain. This is why Schopenhauer says life is suffering, not as a poetic exaggeration, as a factual description of the structure of existence. You are a willing machine. Willing is wanting. Wanting is suffering. Therefore, as long as you exist as a willing being, you suffer. It's not that bad things happen sometimes and the rest of the time is fine. It's that the basic state of being alive and conscious is suffering, interrupted occasionally by brief satisfactions and frequently by intense pains. He puts it like this: life is a business that doesn't cover its costs. The suffering outweighs the pleasure. The pain is constant and structural. The happiness is fleeting and conditional. If you actually tallied it up honestly, existence is a net negative. It would be better not to have been born at all. This is pessimism, real, philosophical pessimism. Not just being in a bad mood or expecting the worst, but the position that existence itself is bad. That consciousness is a curse. That being born is the original tragedy from which all other suffering flows. And before you dismiss this as just depressing nonsense from a bitter old man, consider your own experience. How much of your life is spent wanting things you don't have? How often do you get what you want and find that it doesn't satisfy you the way you thought it would? How much time do you spend being afraid of losing what you have or suffering because you already lost it? How often are you bored, restless, looking for the next thing to fill the void? Be honest. How much of your conscious experience is actually pleasant? And how much is some flavor of dissatisfaction, anxiety, frustration, fear, or just low-level unease? For most people, if they're really honest, the majority of life is some kind of suffering. The good moments are real, but they're islands in a sea of want and worry. Schopenhauer is just saying out loud what most people feel but won't admit, because admitting it seems defeatist or depressing. But there's something powerful about honesty, about looking at the thing clearly without flinching. Because once you see the structure, once you understand that the suffering isn't a bug, it's a feature, you stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking you're doing something wrong. You stop believing that if you just tried harder, or wanted different things, or fixed yourself in the right way, everything would be okay. It won't be okay. It can't be okay. Because okay isn't the default state. Suffering is the default state. You're a manifestation of the will, and the will suffers. That's what it does. Now, you might be thinking, if this is true, if life really is just structural suffering with occasional breaks, then what's the point? Why not just check out? Why did Schopenhauer keep living? Why should anyone? And this is where we start to turn a corner. Because Schopenhauer, despite all his darkness, despite seeing more clearly than almost anyone how bad the situation is, he kept looking for ways to cope. He didn't just describe the problem. He looked for solutions, or at least for relief. He identified a few possibilities. The first, and the most extreme, is complete denial of the will. Total renunciation, becoming an ascetic, giving up all desire, starving the will until it releases you. This is basically the Buddhist path to nirvana. Stop wanting, stop striving, achieve a kind of conscious nothingness where you're still alive, but you've extinguished the fire of desire. Schopenhauer thought this was the only real permanent escape. But he also knew it was basically impossible for most people. You can't just decide to stop wanting. The will is too strong. It takes a lifetime of practice, probably multiple lifetimes if you believe in reincarnation, to get anywhere close to that state. The second possibility is what he called compassion. Recognizing that everyone else is also suffering, that the apparent separation between you and other people is an illusion created by the representation, and that fundamentally you're all the same, will experiencing itself in different forms. This recognition can soften the edges of suffering, make you less focused on your own pain, create moments of genuine connection. Schopenhauer thought compassion was the foundation of morality, the only real moral motivation. But it's not an escape. It's a way of bearing the burden together. But there's a third possibility. Something that works in the moment, that anyone can access, that doesn't require years of meditation or impossible levels of self-denial. Something that provides genuine, immediate relief from the grinding of the will. And this is what the rest of this documentary is about. Aesthetic contemplation. The experience of losing yourself in art, in music, in nature, in anything beautiful or sublime or overwhelming enough to make you forget your individual will and become, for a moment, pure awareness, will-less, desireless, free. This is the escape hatch. This is the thing that makes life bearable. This is what Schopenhauer discovered that could actually save you. But to understand how it works and why it matters, we need to go deeper. We need to understand what happens to consciousness during aesthetic contemplation. We need to understand the difference between looking at something as a willing subject and perceiving it as a will-less subject. We need to understand beauty, the sublime, the role of art, and the nature of genius. That's what we're going to explore in the next parts. But for now, you understand the foundation. You understand the prison. You're a manifestation of the will. The will is endless wanting. Wanting is suffering. Therefore, you suffer, necessarily, structurally. As long as you're alive. This is the truth Schopenhauer forces you to face. It's dark. It's uncomfortable. Most philosophy tries to avoid it or explain it away or convince you it's not as bad as it seems. Schopenhauer doesn't do that. He looks at it directly and tells you what he sees. Life is suffering. The system is slavery. The normal paths, achievement and pleasure and self-improvement, they're all just more of the will, more wanting, more suffering, disguised as the solution to suffering. But there is something else. There is a way to step outside, temporarily, and experience consciousness without the burden of desire, without the grinding of the will. It's real, it works, and it's been available to you your whole life. We're going to learn how to use it deliberately, how to make it a practice instead of an accident, how to build a life that has enough of these moments, that the suffering in between becomes bearable. The prison is real. But the door isn't locked all the time. In the next part, we're going to understand the philosophy more deeply. We're going to see how Schopenhauer's pessimism connects to Eastern thought, why optimism is a lie, and why trying to fix yourself is just another trap. Stay with me. This gets better. Or at least, it gets clearer. And clarity, even about something dark, is better than false hope. So now you understand the basic structure. End quote. With clipsetted dimension is of complete, 4 in the basic structure. With clipsetted dimension is of complete, and quote setted dimension is of clipsetted dimension is of complete. With clipsetted dimension is of complete, the will, the endless wanting, the suffering that's built into existence itself. But let's go deeper, because Schopenhauer wasn't just some guy who woke up one day in a bad mood and decided life sucks. He built a complete philosophical system, and he did it by drawing on traditions from both East and West that most European philosophers of his time were completely ignoring. What's fascinating is that Schopenhauer came to his conclusions partially on his own, through observation and reasoning, and then discovered that ancient Indian philosophy had been saying basically the same thing for thousands of years. It was like finding out that someone on the other side of the world had independently mapped the same territory you just explored. And that confirmation, that recognition, it strengthened his conviction that he'd actually found something true. Not just a perspective, not just one way of looking at things, but the actual structure of reality. Let's start with the Buddha, because the parallels are striking and they help clarify what Schopenhauer was really saying. The Buddha lived around 500 BCE in what's now Nepal and northern India. He was born a prince, had everything, and at age 29 he basically had an existential crisis. He saw suffering, old age, sickness, death, and realized that all his wealth and comfort couldn't protect him from these fundamental facts of existence. So he left, abandoned his palace, his wife, his kid, everything, and went searching for the truth about suffering. He tried extreme asceticism, nearly starved himself to death, and realized that wasn't the answer. Then he sat under a tree and meditated until he figured it out. And what he figured out became the foundation of Buddhism, the 4 noble truths. First noble truth, life is suffering. Or more accurately, life is dukkha, which means dissatisfaction, unease, the fundamental unsatisfactoriness of existence. Everything is impermanent, everything changes, everything you cling to will eventually be lost. Even happy moments are tinged with suffering because you know they won't last. Sound familiar? This is exactly what Schopenhauer is saying. Existence itself is the problem. Second noble truth, the cause of suffering is craving, tanha, thirst. You suffer because you want. You want pleasure, you want permanence, you want things to be different than they are. And because everything is impermanent and unsatisfying, your wanting is endless. You're never fully satisfied. Again, this is Schopenhauer's will, the blind striving, the endless desire that drives everything. The Buddha called it craving, Schopenhauer called it will. Same diagnosis. Third noble truth, there is an end to suffering, nirvana. The extinction of craving. If you can stop wanting, stop clinging, stop identifying with your desires, you can escape the cycle. Schopenhauer bought this completely. He agreed that denial of the will, complete renunciation of desire, was the only permanent escape from suffering. The difference is, the Buddha laid out a specific path to get there, the Eightfold Path, with practices and ethics and meditation techniques. Schopenhauer was more pessimistic about whether people could actually achieve it. He thought maybe 1 in a million people might get close. Fourth noble truth. The path to the end of suffering is the Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Basically, a comprehensive system for training yourself to let go of desire and see reality clearly. Schopenhauer respected this, but didn't think most people had the discipline or the grace or whatever you want to call it to actually walk that path to completion. He saw Buddhism as fundamentally correct but practically out of reach for the average person. But here's what's important. Schopenhauer discovered these teachings after he'd already developed his own philosophy. He read translations of Hindu texts like the Upanishads and accounts of Buddhism in the 1810s, and it was like a lightning bolt. Here was confirmation, from a completely different tradition, from people who'd been thinking about this for millennia, that his insights about the will and suffering were on target. The Upanishads, these ancient Hindu texts, they talk about Maya, the illusion of the world. The idea that what you perceive as reality, this world of separate objects and individual selves, is actually a kind of trick. Beneath the appearance of multiplicity, there's a unified reality, Brahman, the universal ground of being, and your individual self, Atman, is actually identical to Brahman. The separation is illusory. Schopenhauer mapped this directly onto his system. Maya is representation, the world as it appears to you, organized by space and time and causality. Brahman is the will, the thing in itself, the unified reality beneath appearances. The illusion is that you're separate from other people, from nature, from everything. In truth, you're all manifestations of the same will. And the goal in both systems is similar. In Hinduism, it's realizing your identity with Brahman and escaping the cycle of rebirth, samsara. In Schopenhauer, it's seeing through the illusion of individuality and denying the will, achieving a kind of conscious nothingness where you're free from desire. So Schopenhauer synthesized Kant's epistemology, Buddhist ethics, Hindu metaphysics, and his own observations into this comprehensive pessimistic philosophy. And pessimism is the right word. He wasn't just in a bad mood. He had philosophical arguments for why existence is fundamentally negative. Let's look at those arguments, because they're stronger than you might think. First argument: the asymmetry between pain and pleasure. Pain is positive. It's a real, actual experience that demands your attention. When you're in pain, you know it. It's vivid, intense, undeniable. Pleasure, on the other hand, is mostly just the absence of pain. You feel good when you're not suffering, when you're not hungry, not lonely, not afraid, not uncomfortable. Pleasure is negative. It's the removal of a lack. Think about it. The satisfaction of eating is really just the relief of hunger. The pleasure of rest is the relief of exhaustion. The joy of success is relief from the anxiety of not having succeeded. Most of what you call happiness is actually just the temporary absence of suffering. And pain is constant. You have to actively maintain comfort. You have to keep eating or you starve. You have to keep working or you lose security. You have to keep maintaining relationships or you lose connection. It's endless effort to avoid pain. Pleasure doesn't maintain itself. Pain is the default. Schopenhauer says, look at your own attention. What captures it? Pain. When you have a headache, can you think about anything else? No. It dominates your consciousness. But when you're feeling fine, you barely notice it. Health is invisible until you lose it. Comfort is invisible until it's disrupted. Pain announces itself when tak dr con self. Pleasure is just the brief silences between pain's announcements. Second argument: satisfaction never equals desire. You want something intensely. You imagine how good it'll be to have it. You finally get it. And the reality is always less than the anticipation. Always. This is because desire creates an expectation, a fantasy, and reality can never match it. The thing you wanted was perfect in your imagination. In reality, it's just another object, another experience, another thing that doesn't actually fill the void. This is why achievement feels empty. Why getting what you want is often anticlimactic. The wanting was more vivid than the having. The chase was more intense than the capture. You spent all this energy pursuing something, and when you get it, you realize it didn't solve the fundamental problem. You're still you still want. The game just starts over with a new object. Third argument: life requires constant effort to maintain. Everything is falling apart all the time. Your body is decaying. Your relationships require maintenance. Your possessions break down. Entropy is always winning. You have to work constantly just to stay in place. And all this effort, all this striving, it's not moving you towards some final state of permanent satisfaction. It's just keeping you from sliding backward into pain and chaos. It's like running on a treadmill. You're exerting all this energy and going nowhere. The moment you stop, you fall off. And for what? So you can keep running tomorrow? There's no destination. There's just the endless need to keep moving to avoid suffering. Fourth argument. The more consciousness, the more suffering. Animals suffer, but they suffer in the moment. A deer being chased by a wolf is terrified right then. But 5 minutes later, if it escapes, it's fine. It's not worrying about the next wolf attack. It's not having an existential crisis about the meaninglessness of existence. It lives in the present. Humans suffer in the past, present, and future simultaneously. You remember past pains. You anticipate future problems. You're anxious about things that haven't happened and might never happen. You regret things you did years ago. You worry about dying, about losing what you have, about not achieving what you want. Your capacity for abstract thought, which seems like a gift, is actually a curse. It multiplies your suffering. And the smarter you are, the worse it is. The more clearly you see the futility, the meaninglessness, the structural suffering, the more you suffer from that knowledge. Ignorance really is bliss. Consciousness is suffering. Schopenhauer says the most perfect being would be the one that suffers most, because it would be most conscious, most aware, most capable of experiencing the full weight of existence. Humans suffer more than animals. Geniuses suffer more than average people. The price of awareness is pain. Fifth argument. Existence is worse than non-existence. This is the big one. If you could choose, knowing what you know now about what life entails, would you choose to exist? Be honest. Knowing that you'll spend most of your time wanting things you don't have, working to avoid pain, watching everyone you love eventually die, experiencing your own decay and death, would you sign up for that? Schopenhauer says, no rational being would choose existence if they really understood what it meant. The only reason we cling to life is because the will forces us to. The survival instinct is the will's way of perpetuating itself despite the fact that non-existence would be preferable. We're trapped in a game we didn't agree to play and can't win. He's not saying you should kill yourself. He actually argues against suicide, for complicated reasons we'll get to. But he is saying that it would have been better not to have been born at all. And once you are born, the least bad option is to minimize your suffering as much as possible and help others minimize theirs until death finally releases you. This is dark, really dark. And most philosophers, then and now, reject this completely. They argue that Schopenhauer is just depressed, that he's generalizing from his own miserable experience, that he's ignoring all the good in the world. But let's look at their counter-arguments, because Schopenhauer had responses. The optimists say, but life has so many joys: love, beauty, achievement, connection. Schopenhauer says, sure, and how long do those joys last compared to the suffering? Add it up, honestly. How many hours of genuine joy versus hours of pain, boredom, anxiety, frustration? The joys are real, but they're islands in a sea of suffering, the optimists say. But life has meaning. We're progressing towards something better, Schopenhauer says. Prove it. Show me the evidence that history is progressing toward anything except more of the same. People have been suffering and dying for thousands of years. The forms change, but the fundamental structure doesn't. We have better technology, fine. Are people happier? Are they suffering less? No, they just have different things to worry about. Progress is an illusion we tell ourselves to make the treadmill feel like it's going somewhere. The optimists say, but we have free will. We can choose to make our lives better. Schopenhauer says, you don't have free will. You think you do because you don't see the chains. But you're driven by motives you didn't choose, desires you didn't create, a will that operates through you without your consent. You can choose between different objects of desire, sure, but you can't choose to stop desiring. The will is in charge, not you. This is hard to hear if you've been raised on optimism, on the idea that you're the captain of your ship, that life is what you make it, that positive thinking and hard work lead to happiness. Schopenhauer is saying that's all cope. It's stories people tell themselves to avoid facing the reality that they're stuck in a fundamentally negative situation. And here's where this connects directly to your experience, to why you're watching this documentary, because you've already seen through some of the cope, haven't you? You've already noticed that the self-improvement industry is selling you solutions that don't actually work. That therapy and mindfulness and gratitude journals and positive affirmations might help a little bit, but they don't touch the core problem. That working harder and achieving more doesn't make you happy, it just gives you new things to worry about. One of your viewers said it perfectly. I hate the system that makes us slaves, but we have no choice because we have to pay our bills. You can see the trap. I have always Bill Dodd. We have no choice, slaves perfected. We have no choice, slaves perfected. We have no choice, perfected, slaves perfected. You can see the trap of other Dodd as other Dodd. You're forced to participate in a system that grinds you down, that extracts your time and energy and life force just so you can survive. And all the mainstream solutions, all the advice about finding your passion and hustling harder and being your best self, it's just more of the same. It's the will telling you to will better. Schopenhauer would say, "You're right to be suspicious. The system is slavery because existence itself is slavery. You're enslaved to the will." Society just organizes that enslavement into specific forms, capitalism or feudalism or whatever, but the underlying problem is that you're a biological machine driven by needs you didn't choose toward goals that won't satisfy you. And the really insidious thing is how the system sells you the idea that you're free, that you have choices, that if you're not happy, it's because you're not trying hard enough, or wanting the right things, or thinking the right way. This is gaslighting on a civilizational scale. You're suffering because you're alive and conscious, not because you're doing something wrong. But admitting that would undermine the whole structure. So instead, they convince you to keep chasing, keep achieving, keep improving, keep consuming, keep feeding the will. Let's talk about the self-improvement trap specifically, because this is something your audience has responded to strongly. The promise of self-improvement is that you're broken and you can fix yourself. If you just read the right books, follow the right routine, develop the right habits, think the right thoughts, you'll become the person you're supposed to be. And that person, that ideal version of you, will be happy. Or at least happier, less anxious, more confident, more successful, more fulfilled. But here's the problem. The desire to improve yourself is itself a form of suffering. It's built on the premise that you're not good enough as you are, that your current self is inadequate. So right from the start, you're in a state of lack. You're wanting to be different than you are. And wanting, as we've established, is suffering. So you start the self-improvement journey. You set goals, you work on yourself, you make progress. Maybe you do improve in some measurable way. You're more productive, or more fit, or more disciplined. Great. Are you satisfied? No. Because now you can see the next level. Now you're aware of new inadequacies. The goalposts move. The ideal version of you is always just out of reach. And even if you achieve everything you set out to achieve, even if you become that ideal person, you're still you. You're still conscious. You still have desires. You still suffer. The form of your suffering might change, but the fundamental structure doesn't. You've just given the will new objects to pursue. Schopenhauer would say, self-improvement is the will improving its own machinery. You're not escaping the will by becoming a better version of yourself. You're just making yourself a more efficient vessel for the will to operate through. It's like a slave learning to work faster. You haven't freed yourself. You've just gotten better at being enslaved. And there's something almost cruel about it. Because the people selling you self-improvement are usually suffering too. They're stuck on the same treadmill, running in the same hamster wheel, just convinced that if they run fast enough they'll break through to some other state. They won't. Nobody does. But they can make money and feel purposeful by selling the dream to others. So the cycle perpetuates. Your audience gets this. You've seen through it. The comments on your videos about self-improvement being a trap, they're from people who tried the conventional path and realized it doesn't work. It just makes you more aware of your inadequacies, more anxious about your performance, more attached to outcomes that won't satisfy you even if you achieve them. So, what's the alternative? If self-improvement is a trap, If achievement is a trap, if pleasure is a trap, if everything is suffering and the will is in control, what are you supposed to do? This is where most pessimistic philosophies fall apart. They describe the problem brilliantly and then offer nothing. Or they offer renunciation, which sounds good in theory but is basically impossible in practice. Become a monk, give up all desire, meditate for 40 years, maybe achieve enlightenment? Great. But what about everyone else? What about people who have jobs and families and bills to pay? What about people who can't or won't dedicate their entire existence to escaping existence? Schopenhauer actually has an answer. Multiple answers, actually. And this is why he's not just a philosopher of despair. He's a philosopher of despair who looked for ways to cope with the despair. Ways that work for regular people in the real world. The first way is compassion. If you understand that everyone is suffering, that everyone is driven by the same blind will, that the apparent separation between you and others is illusory, you can develop genuine compassion. Not pity, not condescension, but recognition. That person who cut you off in traffic, they're suffering. Your annoying coworker, suffering. The politician you hate, suffering. Everyone is trapped in the same nightmare, doing the best they can with the consciousness they have. This recognition changes things. It makes you less angry, less judgmental, less focused on your own pain. Because you realize it's not personal. The will is grinding everyone. You're all in this together. And that solidarity, that shared suffering, it creates a kind of connection that's deeper than the usual social bonds. Schopenhauer thought this was the only basis for real morality, not rules handed down by God or social contracts or rational principles. Just the recognition that harming another person is harming yourself, because there's no fundamental separation. The will in them is the will in you. Their suffering is your suffering. So, you act with compassion not because you're trying to be good, but because you've seen through the illusion of separateness. This is powerful, but it's not enough. Compassion doesn't stop your own suffering. It just gives you a framework for relating to the suffering of others. You still need something that provides direct, immediate relief from the grinding of the will. The second way, the one we're going to spend the most time on, is aesthetic contemplation. But before we get there, I want to address something Schopenhauer said about suicide, because it's relevant and it's often misunderstood. You might think, if life is suffering and non-existence is preferable to existence, Schopenhauer would endorse suicide as a rational choice. He doesn't, and his reasons are interesting. First, suicide doesn't deny the will, it affirms it. When you kill yourself, you're not saying, I reject existence. You're saying, I want existence, but I want it to be different than it is, and since I can't make it different, I'll end it. You're still caught up in wanting. You want relief, you want escape, you want the suffering to stop. The act of suicide is driven by desire, by the will. It's not will-lessness. It's the will turning against itself. Second, suicide solves nothing. If you believe in reincarnation, which Schopenhauer did in some form, killing yourself just puts you back in the cycle. You'll be reborn into another body with the same fundamental problem. If you don't believe in reincarnation, fine, you've ended your individual suffering, but you haven't addressed the underlying issue. The will continues. Other beings continue to suffer. You've just removed yourself from the picture. Third, and this is more practical, suicide comes from a misunderstanding. People who kill themselves usually think they're escaping suffering. But they're actually so attached to life, to how they want life to be, that they can't bear it being different. If they truly understood that suffering is structural and unavoidable, they wouldn't expect life to be good. They'd accept it as it is and find ways to cope. Schopenhauer's position is basically, suicide is understandable but misguided. The real solution is not to end existence but to deny the will while still existing. To achieve a state where you're alive but not driven by desire, where you've seen through the illusion and no longer cling to anything. But again, that's basically impossible for most people. So in the meantime, while you're working toward that impossible goal or accepting that you'll never reach it, you need tools. Practical tools. Things that actually provide relief. And this is where aesthetic contemplation comes in. But I don't want to rush into it because the foundation matters. You need to understand how deep the problem goes before you can appreciate the solution. Let's talk about one more aspect of Schopenhauer's pessimism. The problem with time. You exist in time. Your consciousness is temporal. You experience moments sequentially, one after another, and you can't go back. This seems obvious, but it has profound implications for suffering. Every good moment is already in the process of ending as you experience it. You can't hold on to it. You can't make it last. It's flowing away from you even as it's happening. This creates anxiety. You know the good things won't last. You're enjoying something and simultaneously dreading its end. The present is poisoned by the future, and every bad moment seems eternal while you're in it. Pain expands time. 5 minutes of intense suffering feels longer than an hour of contentment. Your consciousness is structured in a way that makes suffering more vivid and more memorable than pleasure. Plus, you remember the past, which means you carry your suffering with you. That embarrassing thing you did 10 years ago still hurts when you think about it. That loss you experienced? Still painful. The past isn't gone. 17. 1b8 praise. It's alive in your memory, creating suffering in the present. And you anticipate the future, which means you suffer from things that haven't happened yet and might never happen. You're anxious about losing your job even though you still have it. You're afraid of death even though you're currently alive. You're worried about what people will think even though they haven't thought it yet. Future suffering haunts you constantly, so you're never just in the present. You're spread across time, suffering in the past, present, and future simultaneously. Animals don't have this problem. They live in the moment. Humans are trapped in temporal consciousness, which multiplies suffering exponentially. Schopenhauer says this is another reason why consciousness is a curse. The more sophisticated your mind, the more time you can range across, the more you suffer. A person with a simple mind lives more in the present, suffers less from memory and anticipation. A genius is haunted by the past and terrorized by the future constantly. Intelligence is suffering, and there's no escape through time. You can't go back and fix the past. You can't skip forward to a better future. You're stuck in this relentless forward motion, watching good things disappear and bad things approach. Time is a prison, unless you can step outside of time. Not literally, but experientially. Unless you can find moments where time stops meaning anything, where past and future collapse, and you're just here, now, without the burden of temporal consciousness. This is what aesthetic contemplation does. It stops time. Or rather, it stops your relationship to time. You're so absorbed in the present moment of perception that you forget you're a being that exists across time. You forget you have a past and a future. You forget you're going to die. You just are. And in those moments, the temporal dimension of suffering disappears. You're not remembering pain or anticipating pain. You're not trying to hold on to pleasure or dreading its end. You're in a timeless now, experiencing something without the filter of time. This is huge. This is maybe the most important thing we're going to talk about. Because if temporal consciousness is a major source of suffering, and aesthetic contemplation can temporarily suspend temporal consciousness, then it's not just a distraction or a pleasant experience. It's a genuine escape from one of the fundamental structures of suffering. But we need to understand exactly how this works. What happens to consciousness during aesthetic contemplation? What's the mechanism? Why does looking at a painting or listening to music have this effect? How can you use it deliberately instead of waiting for it to happen accidentally? That's what we're going to explore in the next part. The actual structure of aesthetic experience, the difference between normal perception and will-less perception, the role of beauty and the sublime, the nature of artistic genius, and most importantly, how you can access this state yourself, consistently, whenever you need it. Because here's the thing. Schopenhauer's pessimism is true. Life is suffering. The will is in control. You're trapped in a body that wants things, in a consciousness that ranges across time, multiplying pain. The system is slavery. Self-improvement is a trap. Achievement is a trap. Pleasure is a trap. Everything you've been told about how to be happy is either a lie or a cope. But aesthetic contemplation is real. The relief it provides is genuine. The freedom it offers, even though it's temporary, is actual freedom, not the fake freedom of having choices within the system. Real freedom from the system itself. from the will, from desire, from time, from suffering. And once you understand how it works, once you see it clearly, you can build your life around it. Not as an escape from responsibility, not as an excuse to check out, but as a survival strategy, as the thing that makes the suffering bearable, as the reason to keep going even though you know how bad it is. Schopenhauer didn't just describe the nightmare, he found lights in the darkness, small lights, flickering, temporary, but real. And he's offering to show you where they are. In the next part, we stop talking about the problem and start talking about the solution. We're going to understand aesthetic contemplation from the inside out. How it works, why it works, and how to make it work for you. The prison is real, but you're about to learn where the doors are. All right, now we get to the good part. The thing that makes all of this bearable, the thing that actually works. We've established that you're trapped. You're a manifestation of the will, driven by desires you didn't choose, suffering necessarily and structurally just by being alive and conscious. The normal solutions don't work. Self-improvement is just more will. Achievement is just more wanting. Pleasure is temporary and usually just relief from pain. You're stuck on a treadmill that never stops, oscillating between desire, brief satisfaction, and boredom until you die. Cool. Great. So what now? This is where Schopenhauer does something that most pessimistic philosophers don't do. He doesn't just leave you there. He actually found something, a genuine escape. Not a permanent solution, not a cure, but a real, repeatable, accessible way to step outside the grinding machine of the will and experience consciousness without suffering, without desire, without time, without the burden of being you. He called it aesthetic contemplation. And it's one of the most important discoveries in the history of philosophy, even though most people have never heard of it and the ones who have usually misunderstand it. So, let's understand it properly. From the ground up, what it is, how it works, why it provides relief, and how you can use it. First, we need to understand normal perception, how you usually experience the world. Right now, you're watching this video, but you're not just perceiving it neutrally, right? You're relating to it. You're judging whether it's interesting or boring. You're thinking about whether you agree or disagree. You're maybe getting distracted by other thoughts, planning what you're going to do later, remembering something this reminds you of. Your perception is filtered through your needs, your interests, your identity, your current mood. This is what Schopenhauer calls knowledge in service of the will. You're experiencing the world as a willing subject. Everything you perceive is automatically categorized in terms of how it relates to you. Is it useful? Is it threatening? Is it relevant to your goals? Does it make you look good? Can you use it? Should you avoid it? You see food, you think, am I hungry? You see a person, you think, what do they think of me? What do they want? Are they attractive? Are they dangerous? You see a chair, you think, can I sit there? Everything is filtered through the lens of your personal will, your individual needs and desires. And this makes sense, right? This is adaptive. This is how you survive. If you didn't evaluate things in terms of their relevance to your survival and comfort, you'd be in trouble. The will needs you to relate to the world this way. It needs you to constantly assess and react and pursue and avoid. That's how it perpetuates itself. But here's what that means. When you're perceiving the world as a willing subject, you're not actually seeing things as they are. You're seeing them as they relate to you. Your perception is fundamentally self-centered, even when you're not consciously thinking about yourself. The will is always there, coloring everything, turning the world into a collection of potential means to satisfy desires or obstacles to avoid. You're trapped in your own perspective. You're locked inside the prison of your individual will. Everything you experience is experienced through that filter. You can't turn it off, normally. It's just how consciousness works when you're a biological organism driven by the will. Except sometimes, something different happens. You're walking through a museum and you stop in front of a painting. It's just supposed to be background, something to look at while you kill time. But something about it grabs you. The colors, the composition, the way the light falls, something. And you find yourself staring at it, really looking at it, not thinking about it, not analyzing it, just perceiving it. And gradually, everything else fades away. You forget you're in a museum. You forget you have places to be. You forget your problems, your plans, your identity. There's just this painting and your awareness of it. You've lost yourself in it. Time stops meaning anything. You don't know if you've been standing there for 1 minute or 10 minutes. It doesn't matter. In that moment, you're not a willing subject anymore. You're not relating the painting to your needs or goals. You're not thinking, would this look good in my apartment? Or I could never paint like this. Or this reminds me of that other painting. You're just seeing it. Pure perception. The painting is just being what it is, and you're just being awareness of it. No agenda, no filter, no self. This is aesthetic contemplation. This is the state Schopenhauer is talking about. Or you're listening to music. Maybe it's a piece you've heard before, maybe it's new, doesn't matter. But something about it, the melody or the harmony or the emotion it carries, it just hits you. And you stop doing whatever else you were doing. You're not listening as background noise. You're not thinking about the music. You're in it. You've dissolved into it. The boundary between you and the sound blurs. There's just this pure experience of music happening, and you're not separate from it anymore. Your mind goes quiet. All the usual mental chatter, the worrying and planning and remembering, it stops. There's just the music. And you're not even you anymore in the normal sense. You're just this point of awareness. Consciousness without content, experiencing the music without the burden of being a self that wants things. Or you're in nature. You're hiking, and you come to a viewpoint overlooking a valley. Mountains in the distance, trees below, maybe a river winding through, and it's not that you think, wow, that's pretty. It's deeper than that. You just stop. You stand there looking, and everything goes quiet inside. The scale of it, the indifference of it, the fact that it's been here long before you and will be here long after you're gone, it puts you in your place, but not in a bad way, in a freeing way. You're not important here. Your problems aren't important. The whole drama of your individual existence shrinks to nothing compared to this vast, ancient, uncaring landscape. And instead of feeling threatened by that, you feel relieved. You can let go. You can just be this tiny point of consciousness witnessing something infinitely larger than yourself. And in that witnessing, you're free. These are all examples of aesthetic contemplation, and if you've experienced any of them, you know what I'm talking about. There's a distinctive quality to these experiences, a sense of timelessness, of selflessness, of peace that's different from ordinary pleasure. It's not excitement. It's not happiness in the usual sense. It's more like relief, like a weight you didn't know you were carrying has been lifted, like you can finally breathe. Schopenhauer studied these experiences and asked, what's actually happening here? What's the mechanism? Why does art have this effect? Why does nature do this? And more importantly, why does it feel like freedom? Here's his answer. In aesthetic contemplation, you stop being an individual willing subject and become what he calls a pure, will-less subject of knowing. Your consciousness detaches from your body, from your needs, from your personal identity. You're no longer perceiving the world through the filter of, how does this relate to me? You're perceiving it as it is in itself. The painting isn't something you might want to own or something that reminds you of something else. It's just form and color and composition existing in itself. The music isn't something you like or dislike. It's just pure sound, pure structure, pure feeling. The mountain isn't a resource or a challenge or a photo opportunity. It's just mountainness, the essential nature of what a mountain is. Schopenhauer uses the language of Platonic forms here, which might sound abstract, but bear with me because it's important. Plato thought that behind every individual thing, there's an eternal form or idea. Like, there are millions of individual chairs in the world, all different, but they all participate in the form of chairness. The ideal, eternal, perfect concept of what a chair is. Normally, you don't perceive forms. You perceive individual objects in time and space, and you relate to them through the principle of sufficient reason, which is Schopenhauer's term for causality, for the web of cause and effect that connects everything. This chair was made by someone, for a purpose. It exists in a specific location. It has a history and a future. You understand it through its relationships to other things. But in aesthetic contemplation, you transcend that way of knowing. You stop seeing the individual object in its web of relations and you see the form directly. You see the essential nature of the thing, the universal in the particular. You're perceiving not this specific painting, but beauty itself. Not this specific piece of music, but the eternal structure of harmony and melody. Not this specific mountain, but the sublime power of nature itself. And here's the key insight. When you're contemplating the form, when you're seeing the essential nature of something without relating it to yourself, you've stepped outside the principle of sufficient reason. You're no longer in the world of time and causality and individual needs. You're in a timeless, will-less state, pure consciousness without desire. And the will, which only operates through individual bodies with specific needs in space and time, it can't touch you in that state. You've slipped out of its grip. For that moment, you're free. The suffering stops, because suffering comes from the will, from wanting. But you're not wanting anything. You're not trying to get anywhere, or achieve anything, or avoid anything. You're just being pure awareness, consciousness without content. A mirror reflecting reality without distorting it through personal need. Schopenhauer describes it like this. Normally, you're a small boat on a stormy ocean. The waves are your desires, your fears, your needs. They toss you constantly. You're never at peace. But in aesthetic contemplation, it's like the storm calms, the water goes still. You're floating in perfect calm. The ocean is still there, the boat is still there, but everything is quiet, peaceful. The violence has stopped. This is not ordinary pleasure. Ordinary pleasure is satisfaction of a desire. You wanted food, you ate, you feel good. But that pleasure is tied to the will. It requires you to have wanted something first. It's relative to a previous lack. And it's temporary because soon you'll want something else. Aesthetic pleasure, if you even want to call it pleasure, is different. It's not satisfaction, it's release. You're not getting something you wanted. You're stopping the wanting itself. The relief is deeper because you're not just filling a specific lack, you're stepping outside the whole structure of lack and fulfillment. And it doesn't depend on your personal circumstances. You can be suffering in every other area of your life, but in the moment of aesthetic contemplation, that suffering pauses. It's still there, waiting for you when you come back to normal consciousness. But for that moment, it's gone, completely gone. Because you're not the person who has those problems. You're not a person at all. You're just awareness. This is why Schopenhauer calls it a state of will-lessness. The will hasn't disappeared from the universe. Your body still has needs. The world still operates through causality. But your consciousness has detached from all of that. You're experiencing reality without the mediation of personal will. You're free. Now, this raises some obvious questions, like, if this state is so great, why doesn't it last? Why can't you just stay in aesthetic contemplation forever? Schopenhauer's answer is practical. You have a body. Bodies have needs. If you tried to stay in pure contemplation, you'd starve to death. You'd forget to drink water. You'd freeze or get hit by a car, or die in some other stupid way, because you weren't paying attention to the world of cause and effect where your body exists. The will pulls you back. Eventually, hunger reasserts itself, or physical discomfort, or just the natural rhythm of attention. You can't maintain that level of absorption indefinitely. Your consciousness gets tired. The individual will returns. You remember you're a person with a life and problems and needs. The storm starts up again. But that's okay. That's not a failure. The point isn't to escape permanently. The point is that these moments are possible. That relief exists. That you can access it repeatedly. It's like coming up for air when you're underwater. You can't breathe underwater permanently. But you can surface whenever you need to. The breath is real, even if it doesn't last. And the more you understand what's happening, the more you can use it deliberately. Instead of waiting for aesthetic contemplation to happen accidentally, you can seek it out. You can create conditions for it. You can train yourself to enter that state more easily. But before we get to the practical side, we need to understand what triggers aesthetic contemplation. What makes something capable of pulling you into that will-less state? Why does some art work and some doesn't? What's the difference between looking at a painting and being absorbed by a painting? Schopenhauer's answer involves two concepts: the beautiful and the sublime. The beautiful is something that invites contemplation easily, pleasantly. It's harmonious, balanced, clear in its form. When you look at a beautiful thing, it naturally draws you into contemplation without resistance. A well-composed painting, a graceful sculpture, an elegant piece of architecture, a lovely melody. These things facilitate the transition from willing consciousness to will-less consciousness smoothly. Beauty is like a gentle guide. It takes you by the hand and leads you into contemplation. There's no struggle. The object is so perfectly an expression of its form that perceiving it naturally shifts you into the mode of seeing forms rather than individual things. Your will doesn't resist because the experience isn't threatening, it's pleasant. Your consciousness just slides into will-lessness. The sublime, on the other hand, is something that forces you into contemplation through overwhelm. It's vast, powerful, terrible in the old sense of the word. It threatens your individual will, dwarfs it, makes it seem insignificant. And in doing so, it shocks you into recognizing that you're more than just your individual will, you're also consciousness. Pure awareness. And that awareness can observe even things that threaten your individual existence. Think about standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, or watching a massive storm, or looking up at the night sky and really comprehending the scale of it, or being in the presence of great power, whether it's nature or architecture or whatever. There's a moment of fear. Almost your individual will recoils. This thing could destroy you. It's so much bigger than you. You're nothing compared to it. But then, if you can stay with that feeling instead of fleeing it, something flips. You realize that even though your body is threatened, your consciousness isn't. You can observe this terrible power. You can contemplate it. And in contemplating it, you're no longer identified with your fragile individual will. You're this pure observing consciousness that can witness anything, even its own potential destruction, with calm clarity. The sublime tears you away from your individual will by force. It's not gentle like the beautiful. It's violent. But the result is the same. Will-lessness, freedom, peace. Schopenhauer thought the sublime was actually more powerful than the beautiful precisely because it's more difficult. It requires more of you. You have to overcome the will's natural resistance. And in overcoming it, you prove to yourself that you're more than just will. You're consciousness. And consciousness, in its pure form, is free. Both the beautiful and the sublime serve the same function, though. They pull you out of normal, willing consciousness and into aesthetic contemplation. They facilitate the transition from seeing things as they relate to you to seeing things as they are in themselves, from time-bound to timeless, from individual to universal, from suffering to peace. But here's something interesting. The object itself doesn't create the aesthetic experience. You do. The painting doesn't force you into contemplation. You have to bring a certain kind of attention to it. The mountain doesn't automatically make you will-less. You have to be receptive to that possibility. This is why the same object can be aesthetic for one person and not for another, or aesthetic for you on one day and not on another day. The objective qualities of the thing matter, yeah. Some things are more conducive to aesthetic contemplation than others, but ultimately it's your consciousness that has to make the shift. The object is just the occasion. Schopenhauer calls this the genius of the perceiver. Normally, we think of genius as something artists have, the ability to create great works. And Schopenhauer does think that's a form of genius, we'll get to that. But he also thinks there's genius in perception, the ability to enter aesthetic contemplation easily, to see forms clearly, to lose yourself in pure contemplation. Most people can do this occasionally, under the right circumstances. But some people can do it more easily, more deeply, more often. They have a natural capacity for will-less consciousness. And this capacity, this genius, it's not something you earn through hard work or moral virtue. It's just something you have or don't have, like perfect pitch or synesthesia, a quirk of your consciousness. But even if you don't have genius-level capacity for aesthetic contemplation, you can still access it. You just need the right triggers and the right understanding. You need to know what you're looking for and how to let it happen. Because here's the thing about aesthetic contemplation. You can't force it. You can't will your way into willlessness. That would be a contradiction. The will can't deny itself through effort. It can only release its grip when something else captures your attention so completely that there's no room for willing. This is why art works, why music works, why nature works. These things are powerful enough, compelling enough, that they can override your normal self-interested consciousness. They're more interesting than your problems, more beautiful than your desires, more overwhelming than your fears. They command your attention so completely that the will has to shut up for a minute, and in that silence, you're free. Let's talk about specific art forms, because Schopenhauer had a hierarchy. He thought some arts were better at facilitating aesthetic contemplation than others. At the bottom, he put architecture, which seems harsh, but his reasoning makes sense. Architecture is the most tied to utility. Buildings serve purposes. They shelter you from weather, provide space for activities, make statements about power or wealth. It's hard to forget function when you're looking at a building. The will is always there in the background, evaluating whether the building works, whether it's comfortable, whether it's useful. But good architecture can still trigger aesthetic contemplation. When the form of a building is so perfect, so balanced, so harmonious, that you forget its function and just see it as pure form. Think about great cathedrals or temples. The columns and arches and proportions aren't just functional, they're expressions of mathematical beauty. They embody harmony and balance in a way that transcends their utility. And when you experience them that way, you can enter contemplation. Next up, sculpture and painting. These are less tied to utility. A painting doesn't serve a function beyond being looked at. So it's easier to perceive it purely aesthetically. And the best paintings and sculptures express forms clearly. They capture the essential nature of what they depict. Not just this specific person, but human beauty itself. Not just this landscape, but the form of landscape, the essential quality of nature. Schopenhauer thought the human figure in art was particularly powerful because humans are the most complete expression of the will. We embody the will most fully. So when you contemplate a sculpture of a human figure, you're contemplating the will itself, objectified in form. And in contemplating it, you're seeing it from outside, as an observer, which means you've momentarily escaped your identification with it. Then there's literature, poetry, drama. These work differently because they're not visual, they're conceptual. They use words to evoke forms. A great poem doesn't just describe something. It captures the essential nature of an experience or emotion or idea. And in reading it, your consciousness is pulled into that form. You're not thinking about the words as symbols. You're directly experiencing what they point to. Tragedy, Schopenhauer thought, was particularly powerful because tragedy shows you the suffering that's built into existence. It puts it on stage, makes it visible, makes it aesthetic. And in contemplating suffering aesthetically, you're seeing it from outside. You're not suffering, you're witnessing suffering. And that witnessing is itself willless. Your consciousness observing the will in its most painful expressions. But you're not identified with it in that moment. You're free to see it clearly, but at the top of the hierarchy, above all other arts, Schopenhauer put music. Music, he said, is special. It's different from all the other arts. In a fundamental way, all the other arts represent forms. They express the essential nature of things through visual or verbal representation. Music doesn't represent anything. It's not the form of something else. It's direct expression of the will itself. This is kind of abstract. So, let me try to clarify. When you listen to music, you're not hearing a representation of the world, you're hearing the inner nature of reality. The patterns, the tensions, the resolutions, the rise and fall of musical phrases, they mirror the movements of the will directly. Desire and satisfaction, tension and release, yearning and peace. Music is the will made audible. But because it's aesthetic, because you're experiencing it contemplatively rather than living it, you're outside it. You're hearing the will without being driven by it. You're experiencing the structure of desire and suffering and satisfaction as pure form, as pattern. Without the content, without it being your specific desires and sufferings. This is why music hits so hard. Why it can make you cry or give you chills or transport you completely. You're not just perceiving something beautiful. You're perceiving the fundamental nature of existence itself, the very structure of the will, but you're perceiving it aesthetically, your consciousness witnessing itself. The will contemplating the will, and in that contemplation, you're free. Because you're not in it, you're observing it. The patterns are playing out in the music, not in your life. You get the full emotional intensity without the actual suffering. You get to experience the deepest truths about existence without being crushed by them. Schopenhauer said music is a universal language that speaks directly to the deepest part of you. It bypasses your rational mind, your individual concerns, everything. It goes straight to the core, and it can express things that words can't express. Things that are too fundamental, too universal, too close to the nature of reality itself to be captured in concepts. This is why music feels necessary. Why cultures across all of human history have made music. Why it's not just entertainment, but something essential. It's the only art that lets you experience the truth about existence, the suffering and the beauty and the meaninglessness and the tragedy of it all, from a place of safety, from a place outside the will. You get to feel everything without being destroyed by it. You get the intensity without the consequences. And that's not escapism. That's not running away from reality. That's experiencing reality more clearly than you usually can, but from a position of aesthetic freedom rather than practical enslavement. So music, for Schopenhauer, is the highest art, the most powerful trigger for aesthetic contemplation, the most direct path to will-less consciousness. But all the arts work in their own ways, and nature works. And anything that's beautiful or sublime enough to capture your attention completely works. The specific trigger doesn't matter as much as the state it produces. What matters is that you understand what's happening. That you recognize aesthetic contemplation when you experience it. That you know this is available to you, that you can seek it out deliberately. Because once you know this, once you really understand that there's a reproducible way to step outside the grinding of the will and experience consciousness without suffering, everything changes. You're not helpless anymore. You're not just a victim of existence. You have a tool, a real tool that actually functions. The suffering is still there. The will is still in control most of the time. You still have to live in the world, work, deal with problems, cope with the structural negativity of existence. But you also have these glimpses of what consciousness can be when it's not enslaved to desire, and that's enough. That's what makes it bearable. That's why Schopenhauer kept living despite seeing the truth so clearly. Because he had art, he had music, he had these moments of aesthetic grace where the burden lifted and he could just be. In the next part, we're going to get really practical. We're going to talk about specific practices, how to cultivate the capacity for aesthetic contemplation, what to look for in art, how to use nature, how to build a life that has enough of these moments that you can survive the rest of it, how to make this a discipline instead of just waiting for it to happen randomly. We're also going to talk about artistic genius, what it means to create art that facilitates aesthetic contemplation in others. How great artists are people who can access will-less consciousness deeply and then communicate that experience through their work. Why creating art is itself a form of temporary escape from the will. And we're going to talk about why this isn't enough on its own. Why Schopenhauer, even while saying aesthetic contemplation is crucial, also pointed beyond it, to compassion, to asceticism, to the possibility of actual denial of the will, rather than just temporary escape. But for now, you understand the mechanism. You understand that aesthetic contemplation is real, that it's a genuine shift in consciousness from willing to will-less, that it provides actual relief from actual suffering, that it's not just distraction or entertainment, but something profound, a window into a different mode of being. The prison has doors. You just learned where they are and how they work. In the next part, you'll learn how to use them. Okay, so now you understand the theory. You know what aesthetic contemplation is, how it works, why it provides relief. But theory doesn't help you when you're drowning in suffering. You need something practical. Something you can actually do. Something that works in the real world when you're crushed by the weight of existence and you need relief right now. This part is about making aesthetic contemplation a practice. Not just something that happens to you accidentally when the conditions are right, but something you can access deliberately. A skill you can develop. A tool you can use whenever you need it. And let me be clear about something up front. This isn't going to solve all your problems. It's not going to make the suffering go away permanently. Schopenhauer would call that a lie, and he'd be right. The will is still there. Your body still has needs. The world is still grinding. But what this will do is give you moments of genuine relief, windows of freedom, breaths of air when you're underwater. And if you get good at this, if you really make it a practice, those moments can be enough to make the rest of it bearable. So let's start with the basics. How do you actually enter aesthetic contemplation? The first thing you need to understand is that you can't force it. You can't will yourself into will-lessness. That's a logical contradiction. The harder you try to stop wanting, the more you're wanting to stop wanting. You're still caught in the will. You're just giving it a new object. This is why meditation is so hard, by the way. People sit down trying to quiet their minds, and the trying is itself mental noise. The wanting to be peaceful is itself agitation. You can't achieve peace through effort, because effort is the opposite of peace. So, what do? You create conditions. You remove obstacles. You put yourself in situations where aesthetic contemplation is more likely to happen, and then you get out of your own way. You let it happen instead of making it happen. Think about it like sleep. You can't force yourself to sleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. But you can create conditions for sleep. Dark room, comfortable temperature, regular schedule, no caffeine. You set things up and then you let go. Sleep comes when you stop trying to sleep. Aesthetic contemplation is similar. You find the right trigger, you bring the right kind of attention, and then you stop trying. You allow yourself to be absorbed instead of trying to absorb. So, what are the conditions? What makes aesthetic contemplation more likely? First, you need the right object. Something that's actually capable of capturing your attention completely. This is different for everyone, but there are some general principles. It needs to be beautiful or sublime. Remember, beautiful means harmonious, balanced, inviting contemplation easily. Sublime means overwhelming, vast, powerful enough to dwarf your individual concerns. Either way, it needs to be compelling. It needs to be more interesting than your thoughts. It needs to be complex enough to sustain attention, but not so complex that you're constantly trying to figure it out. If you're analyzing, you're not contemplating. If you're thinking about the object, you're not losing yourself in it. The sweet spot is something that your consciousness can sink into without your analytical mind getting in the way. And it needs to be something you actually respond to. This is crucial. Don't force yourself to contemplate things that don't move you just because someone said they're great art. If classical music doesn't do it for you, don't torture yourself with symphonies. If landscape painting leaves you cold, don't spend time in galleries staring at landscapes. Find what actually works for you. For some people, it's music. For others, it's visual art. For others, it's nature. For others, it's literature or film or architecture or mathematics or whatever. The specific medium doesn't matter. What matters is that it genuinely captures you, that it has the power to pull you out of yourself. Second, you need to eliminate distractions. This is harder than it sounds because your mind is a distraction machine. It's constantly generating thoughts, pulling your attention to your problems, reminding you of things you need to do. This is the will trying to reassert control. It doesn't want you to be will-less. It needs you to be worried and planning and wanting. So you need to create space. This might mean putting your phone away, closing your laptop, finding a quiet place, giving yourself permission to not think about your responsibilities for a while, creating a barrier between you and the normal demands of your life. For aesthetic contemplation to happen, you need to be present. Not thinking about the past or the future, not planning or remembering or worrying, just here, now, with this object of contemplation. And that requires setting things up so you're not constantly being pulled back into practical concerns. Third, you need time. Aesthetic contemplation doesn't happen instantly. Well, sometimes it does, but usually there's a transition period. You sit down with a piece of music or stand in front of a painting, and at first, you're still in normal consciousness. You're aware of yourself, your body, your thoughts. You're looking at the thing, but you're not absorbed in it yet. You have to wait. You have to give it time to work. Sit with the discomfort of not immediately being transported. Let your mind do its thing, generating thoughts and distractions, and keep bringing your attention back to the object, gently, without forcing. Eventually, if the object is powerful enough and you're patient enough, something shifts. The thoughts quiet down. The boundary between you and the object starts to blur. You forget yourself. Time stops meaning anything. You've slipped into aesthetic contemplation. But this takes time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20, depends on the object and your state of mind and how practiced you are. You can't rush it. You have to be willing to just sit there, looking or listening, without demanding immediate results. Fourth, you need the right mindset. Not trying too hard, but also not being passive. There's a kind of active receptivity that works best. You're paying attention deliberately, but you're not analyzing. You're open but not demanding. You're present but not controlling. This is a skill you develop with practice. At first, it feels weird, like you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. Should you be thinking about the art? Not thinking? Feeling something? Not feeling? What's the right approach? The answer is you're just perceiving, fully, completely, without adding commentary or judgment or analysis. You're letting the thing be what it is and letting your consciousness receive it without distortion. Like a mirror that reflects without changing what it reflects. When you notice you're thinking about the object instead of experiencing it, you gently redirect back to the pure perception, back to just seeing or hearing. No narrative, no interpretation, just the raw experience of the thing itself. This is easier with some art forms than others. Music is almost automatic once you really listen. It's hard to think while fully experiencing music. It bypasses your conceptual mind. Visual art requires more discipline because you can look at a painting while thinking about 1,000 other things. You have to really commit to seeing. Now, let's talk about specific practices. Concrete things you can do to develop your capacity for aesthetic contemplation. Practice 1. Build a collection of reliable triggers. You need go-to pieces of art or music or places in nature that you know work for you, things that have pulled you into contemplation before and can do it again. These become your toolkit, your emergency exits when you need relief. For music, maybe it's a specific piece. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, or a particular jazz album, or a song that's always hit you in a way you can't explain. For visual art, maybe it's a painting you can visit in a museum, or a reproduction you keep at home. For nature, maybe it's a specific trail or viewpoint, or even just a park near your house. Whatever it is, identify it. Recognize that this thing has power for you, and then keep it available. Don't let it become background. Don't overuse it to the point where it loses its power. Treat it like medicine. Take it when you need it, and keep testing new things. Your collection should grow. You should be constantly looking for new pieces of music, new artists, new places that might work. Because the more triggers you have, the more tools you have, the more access you have to aesthetic contemplation. Practice 2. Create a ritual around contemplation. Humans are ritual animals. We respond to structure. So if you want to make aesthetic contemplation a regular practice instead of just an occasional accident, you need to ritualize it. This might look like setting aside time every day or every week, specifically for contemplation. Maybe it's Sunday morning, you go to a museum. Or every evening, you listen to music for 30 minutes. Or Saturday afternoon, you hike, whatever works for your schedule and your life. The point is to make it regular, predictable, something you don't have to think about. It's just what you do, and over time, the ritual itself becomes a signal to your consciousness. Your mind knows that during this time, you're shifting modes. You're moving from willing consciousness to contemplative consciousness. The habit makes the transition easier. The ritual can include practical things too. Making tea before you sit down with music, lighting a candle before you look at art, walking a specific route before you reach the viewpoint. These little actions create a boundary between normal life and contemplative time. They help you transition. Practice 3. Learn to recognize the state. This is subtle but important. Aesthetic contemplation has a distinctive quality, a feeling, and the more familiar you become with that feeling, the easier it is to enter it and stay in it. It feels like spaciousness. Like your mind has more room, the usual tightness, the constant pressure of thoughts and worries, it loosens. There's a sense of peace, but not dullness. You're very present, very aware, but not effortfully so. It's effortless awareness. Time changes. It doesn't feel fast or slow, it just stops being something you're aware of. You're not thinking, how long have I been here? You're just here. The past and future collapse into an eternal present. Your sense of self becomes quiet. You're not thinking about yourself, about how you look, or what people think, or what you need to do later. You're not the center of your own awareness. The object of contemplation is the center. You're just the space in which it's being experienced. And there's often a physical component. Your breathing might slow down, your muscles might relax, your face might soften. The body knows when the will has released its grip, and it responds. Learn what this feels like for you. Pay attention to the shift. Notice the moment when you transition from looking at something to being absorbed in it. Notice what that transition feels like. Because the more conscious you are of it, the more you can facilitate it. You can recognize when it's starting to happen and lean into it, or recognize when you've fallen out of it and gently return. Practice 4. Use aesthetic contemplation strategically. Don't wait until you're completely overwhelmed to try this. If you're in the middle of a panic attack or a crisis, it's going to be harder to enter contemplation. Your will is too activated, your thoughts are too loud, the storm is too intense. Instead, use aesthetic contemplation preventatively, regularly. Build it into your life as a maintenance practice, so that when things do get bad, you have an established capacity. You know how to do this. It's a developed skill, not something you're trying for the first time when you're desperate. And when you are suffering intensely, be smart about your choice of trigger. Sometimes you need the gentle beauty that invites you in easily. Other times you need the overwhelming sublime that forces you out of yourself. Read the situation and choose accordingly. If you're anxious, agitated, caught in thought loops, you might need something calm and beautiful, something that soothes, quiet music, peaceful landscapes, harmonious art, something that can match where you are and gently lead you into stillness. If you're depressed, numb, feeling nothing, you might need the sublime. Something that shocks you, that overwhelms, that forces you to feel. Intense music, vast landscapes, powerful art, something that breaks through the numbness. Practice 5. Combine with physical practice. Aesthetic contemplation works better when your body is calm. So combining it with things that calm the body makes sense. This might mean going for a walk before listening to music, or doing some stretching before sitting down to look at art, or practicing deep breathing while in nature. The body and mind are connected. When your body is tense and activated, your mind is harder to quiet. When your body is relaxed, your mind follows. So anything you can do to settle the physical helps the mental. This isn't necessary. Aesthetic contemplation can happen even when you're physically uncomfortable, but it's easier when you're not fighting your body's signals. When you're not distracted by pain or tension or restlessness. Practice 6. Don't judge the experience. This is crucial. When you're in aesthetic contemplation, you might not feel anything dramatic. It might just be quiet, peaceful, kind of boring even. You might wonder if you're doing it right, if it's working. If this is really the profound experience Schopenhauer was talking about. Don't get caught in that analysis. Don't judge the experience while you're having it. That's your will trying to reassert control. It's your ego wanting something impressive to report. It's your desire for the experience to be a certain way instead of just being what it is. Just be in it. Whatever it is. If it's quiet, it's quiet. If it's peaceful, it's peaceful. If it's nothing special, it's nothing special. The relief is there even when it's subtle. The freedom is there even when it doesn't feel dramatic. And sometimes, after the fact, you'll realize how much lighter you feel, how the suffering that was crushing you before seems more distant now, how you have a little more space to breathe. The effects aren't always obvious in the moment. Sometimes they accumulate. Sometimes you only notice them in retrospect. Now, let's talk about different mediums and how to approach them. Music is probably the most accessible for most people. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need any expertise. You just need something to play music on. But how you listen matters. Don't use music as background. Don't listen while you're doing other things. If you want aesthetic contemplation, music has to be the only thing. You need to really listen. Full attention. Good headphones help. Closing your eyes helps. Removing all distractions helps. And pick music that's complex enough to sustain attention. Music that has depth, that reveals itself over time. Not just catchy hooks or simple melodies. Something with layers, with structure, with emotional range. Classical music works for a lot of people for this reason. Jazz works, ambient works, even some rock or electronic if it has enough complexity. But it has to be music you actually respond to. Don't force yourself to listen to things that don't move you. Schopenhauer loved opera and orchestral music, but that doesn't mean you have to. Find what works for you, and when you're listening, don't try to understand the music intellectually. Don't analyze the chord progressions or think about the structure. Just let it wash over you. Let it move you. Feel it in your body. Let your consciousness dissolve into it. Visual art is different because you have to go somewhere, usually. Museums, galleries, even just finding good reproductions online. But the practice is similar. You find a piece that speaks to you, and you just look at it, really look at it. Not glancing, not reading the label, not thinking about what the artist meant, just seeing. Let your eyes move over the painting. Notice colors, shapes, composition. Don't narrate what you're seeing. Don't compare it to other paintings. Don't judge whether you like it. Just see it. Let it be what it is, and give it time. Stand there longer than feels comfortable. Most people look at a painting for like 5 seconds and move on. You need minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes if you can. The longer you stay with it, the more it reveals. The more your normal consciousness quiets down and contemplative consciousness emerges. If you're looking at sculptures, walk around them. See them from different angles. Notice how the light changes the forms, how the shadows create depth. Again, no analysis, just pure perception. For architecture, the same principles apply. But architecture is interesting because you're often in it, not just looking at it. So you can use your whole body. How does the space make you feel? How does the light work? What's the scale doing to your sense of yourself? Let the building act on you. Don't resist it. Experience it fully. Nature is maybe the most powerful trigger for a lot of people because it's the most obviously sublime. You don't need expertise to be overwhelmed by a mountain or an ocean. Nature does the work for you, but you still need to bring the right attention. If you're hiking and you're thinking about your problems the whole time, you're not in contemplation, you're just walking. You have to actually stop. Actually look. Actually be present with what's in front of you. Find a place with a view. Sit down. Don't take photos, at least not right away. Don't think about posting on social media. Don't narrate the experience to yourself. Just be there. Look at it. Let it be vast and ancient and indifferent. Let it put you in your place. Let your individual concerns shrink to nothing compared to this. The ocean is particularly good for this. The sound of waves, the endless horizon, the power of it. You can sit and stare at the ocean for an hour and lose all sense of time. Same with mountains, same with forests. Same with any landscape that's big enough and wild enough to remind you that you're small and temporary and not in control. And weather can be aesthetic too. A thunderstorm, if you can watch it safely. Heavy rain, snow falling. The sublime isn't always pleasant. Sometimes it's frightening, but that's the point. It forces you out of your comfortable individual consciousness into something bigger. Literature is trickier because it's conceptual. You're reading words, which means your rational mind is engaged. But poetry can work if it's good enough. If the language is powerful enough to transcend its own conceptual nature and create direct experience, you have to read slowly. Not for information, but for experience. Let the words create images, feelings, rhythms in your consciousness. Don't analyze the metaphors. Don't think about what the poet meant. Just let the poem work on you. Read it multiple times if you need to. Let it sink in. Same with fiction, though it's harder because novels require sustained engagement over time. But sometimes you hit a passage that stops you. That's so perfectly written, so true, so beautiful, that you just stop and reread it. That can be aesthetic. That moment where the language transcends itself and becomes pure experience. Film can work too, though it's complicated because film is so engineered to manipulate you. You have to find films that are genuinely artistic, not just entertaining. Films that create moments of visual beauty or emotional truth that you can contemplate. Slow films work better than fast films. Films that give you time to just be with images and sounds. And honestly, almost anything can be aesthetic if you bring the right consciousness to it. Mathematics can be beautiful. Code can be elegant. Even everyday objects, if you really look at them, can reveal their forms. A well-designed tool, a perfect piece of fruit, the way light falls on a wall. You don't need high art. You just need attention and receptivity. The practice is the same regardless of the medium. Find something compelling. Give it your full attention. Remove distractions. Give it time. Let go of trying. Allow yourself to be absorbed. Notice when you've entered contemplation. Stay there as long as you can. Return when the will pulls you back. Repeat. Do this regularly and it becomes easier. Your capacity grows. You can enter aesthetic contemplation more quickly, more deeply, more reliably. It becomes a skill, a practice, a tool you can use whenever you need it. Now let's talk about artistic genius, because understanding this helps you both appreciate great art and potentially create your own. Schopenhauer thought genius was the ability to access aesthetic contemplation more easily and deeply than normal people, and then to communicate that experience through art. A genius is someone who can become will-less, contemplate the forms directly, and then express what they saw in a way that helps others see it too. This is why great art feels different from mediocre art. Mediocre art is made by the will, for the will. It's entertainment, distraction, pleasant images or sounds designed to satisfy desires. It doesn't transcend the will, it serves it. Great art comes from a place beyond the will. The artist has entered aesthetic contemplation, seen something essential, something true, something that transcends individual perspective. And then they've made something that can pull others into that same state. When you look at a painting by a great artist, you're not just seeing their technical skill, you're seeing their vision, the form they contemplated. And if they've done their job well, you can see it too. The painting becomes a bridge from their consciousness to yours, from their moment of will-less insight to your moment of will-less perception. Same with music. A great composer has heard something, not a melody they made up, but something they discovered. Something that was always there, in the nature of sound itself, in the structure of the will, expressing itself as music. And they've written it down. And when you hear it, you hear what they heard. You access the same truth they accessed. This is why art matters, why it's not just decoration or entertainment. It's a technology for transmitting aesthetic experience across time and space. An artist in the 1600s can still pull you into contemplation today if their work is good enough. They can reach across centuries and show you what they saw, give you access to their moment of freedom, and you don't have to be a genius to create art that does this for yourself, at least. Even if you're not talented enough to make art that moves others, you can make art that facilitates your own contemplation. The act of creating, when you're doing it from the right place, is itself aesthetic. When you're fully absorbed in making something, when you've forgotten yourself, and you're just the instrument through which the thing is coming into being. That's aesthetic contemplation. You're not thinking about the result or what people will think or whether it's any good. You're just in the flow of creation, will-less, free. This is why people say art is therapeutic. Why making things can feel healing. It's not just distraction. It's genuine escape from the will. For the duration of the creative process, you're not a suffering individual. You're a conduit, pure consciousness expressing forms. So if you're inclined to create, do it. Not to become famous or make money or prove something, but as a practice, as another form of aesthetic contemplation. Paint, write, make music, whatever. Do it for the process, not the product. Do it to enter that flow state where the will shuts up and you can just be. And if you're not inclined to create, that's fine too. You can access aesthetic contemplation entirely through receptivity, through perception, through being the audience rather than the artist. Both paths work. Both provide the same relief. But whether you're creating or perceiving, the key is understanding what you're doing. You're not just looking at pretty things or making pretty things. You're engaging in a practice that temporarily liberates you from the fundamental structure of suffering. You're stepping outside the will. You're becoming consciousness without content. You're free. And the more you do this, the more it accumulates. The moments of freedom start to change how you relate to the moments of suffering. You know relief is possible. You know it's available. You know you can access it whenever you need it. And that knowledge itself makes the suffering more bearable. You're not trapped. You have a way out, even if it's temporary. You have these windows, these doors, these escape hatches, and you can use them again and again for the rest of your life. This is what Schopenhauer is offering you. Not a solution, but a practice. Not happiness, but relief. Not permanent freedom, but moments of freedom that make the slavery tolerable. Use it. Build your collection of triggers. Create your rituals. Develop your capacity. Make aesthetic contemplation a regular part of your life. Not a luxury, not a bonus, but a necessity, a survival tool. The thing that keeps you going when everything else fails. Because it will fail. The system will keep grinding you. The will will keep driving you. The suffering will continue. But you'll have this. These moments where it all stops, where you can breathe, where you can remember that consciousness doesn't have to be torture, that beauty exists, that there's more to existence than just wanting and suffering and dying. In the final part, we're going to talk about what comes after aesthetic contemplation. Because Schopenhauer didn't think it was enough on its own, he pointed beyond it to deeper practices, to compassion and renunciation. We're going to talk about how to integrate all of this into a coherent approach to life, how to actually live with this knowledge, how to build something sustainable. But for now, you have the practice. You know how to access aesthetic contemplation. You know it works. You know it's real. Go use it. Find your music, your art, your places in nature. Build your toolkit. Make it a habit. Let it save you. So we've come a long way. You understand the prison. You understand the philosophy of despair. You understand aesthetic contemplation and how to practice it. But now we need to talk about the hardest part, actually living with all of this. Taking what Schopenhauer discovered and using it to build a life that's bearable, maybe even meaningful in its own way, despite knowing how bad things really are. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you understand that the will is in control, that suffering is structural, that all the normal coping mechanisms are just different forms of slavery, you can't go back to innocence. You can't pretend that working harder or achieving more or fixing yourself is going to solve anything. You know better. And that knowledge is a burden. It's heavy. Most people don't want to carry it. They'd rather believe the lies because the lies are more comfortable. But you're here, watching this, which means you're either already carrying it or you're about to pick it up. So we need to talk about how to carry it without being crushed by it. First, let's acknowledge that aesthetic contemplation alone isn't enough. It's crucial. It's powerful. It provides genuine relief. But it's temporary. You can't live in aesthetic contemplation permanently. You have to come back to the world. You have to work, eat, interact with people, deal with your body and its needs. You have to exist in the realm of the will, even knowing what you know. Schopenhauer understood this. He didn't think aesthetic contemplation was the final answer. He thought it was the best answer available to most people. But he also pointed beyond it, to two other paths that go deeper, that address the fundamental problem more directly. The first is compassion. The second is asceticism, the denial of the will. Let's talk about compassion first, because it's more accessible and more relevant to how you live day to day. Remember, the core insight of Schopenhauer's philosophy is that separation is an illusion. You experience yourself as an individual. Separate from other people, from animals, from nature, you have your own body, your own thoughts, your own desires. It feels like you're a discrete entity, bounded, unique. But that's just how the will appears to you. It's the representation, the world as filtered through your individual perspective. Beneath that appearance, you're all the same thing. The same will, expressing itself in countless forms. The suffering you feel is the same suffering everyone else feels. The wanting, the fear, the pain, it's universal. It's the will experiencing itself. When you really understand this, not just intellectually but experientially, something changes. You can't see other people as fundamentally separate from you anymore. Their suffering is your suffering. Their pain is your pain, because there's no real boundary. The will in them is the will in you. This recognition is the basis of genuine compassion. Not pity, not sympathy from a distance, but actual felt connection. You see someone suffering, and you don't think, that's their problem. You recognize that it's the same problem you have, the same trap, the same nightmare. You're both manifestations of the will, both caught in the grinding machine, and this changes how you act. You can't deliberately increase someone else's suffering because you know it's your own suffering you're increasing. You can't be indifferent to their pain because their pain is not separate from yours. The boundaries that normally justify selfishness and cruelty, they dissolve when you see the truth. Schopenhauer thought this was the only real basis for morality. Not rules handed down by God or social contracts or rational principles. Just this direct recognition that harming others is harming yourself, that helping others is helping yourself. Not because of karma or divine reward, but because the separation between self and other is illusory. And this isn't some abstract philosophical position. It's something you can actually feel, especially in moments when the illusion of separation breaks down. When you see someone in intense pain and you feel it in your own body. When you witness suffering and it moves you in a way that transcends rational calculation. That's the will recognizing itself. That's consciousness seeing through the illusion. Schopenhauer says compassion is the only true moral motive. Everything else, duty, justice, rights, it's all constructed. It's useful for organizing society, sure, but it's not fundamental. Compassion is fundamental. It arises spontaneously when you see the truth about existence. When you recognize that we're all in this together. And compassion makes the suffering more bearable, not because it reduces your own pain, but because it connects you to something larger. You're not alone in this. Everyone is suffering. Everyone is trapped. And in that shared condition, there's a kind of solidarity, a recognition that makes the isolation less total. Plus, acting with compassion, helping others, reducing suffering where you can, it gives you something to do, a way to engage with the world that isn't just feeding your own desires. You're still in the will, yeah, you're still acting, but you're acting from a place that's seen through it. You're using the will against itself, in a way, using your body and your energy to reduce suffering instead of increase it. This doesn't solve the fundamental problem. The will still exists. Suffering still exists. You can't save everyone. You can't end suffering through compassionate action, but you can make it a little less terrible. You can reduce harm. You can be a point of relief in a world that's mostly pain. And for Schopenhauer, this is about as close to moral goodness as you can get while still being alive and active in the world. The saint, the person who acts from pure compassion without any self-interest, without any thought of reward, they've achieved something rare. They're living as though they've seen through the illusion of individuality, even while still inhabiting an individual body. But compassion isn't the final step. It's not the ultimate answer. Because you're still acting, still engaged with the world, still feeding the will in a sense. You've redirected it. made it less selfish, but you haven't denied it. The real final step, according to Schopenhauer, is asceticism. The complete denial of the will, the renunciation of all desire, all striving, all attachment to life itself. This is the path of the monk, the ascetic, the person who withdraws from the world and dedicates themselves to extinguishing the will within themselves. They give up possessions, pleasures, even basic comforts. They fast, they meditate, they detach from everything. They're trying to starve the will, to weaken its grip, until finally it releases them entirely. And if they succeed, if they actually manage to deny the will completely, they achieve what Schopenhauer calls the denial of the will to life. They're still alive, still conscious, but they're no longer driven by desire. They've achieved a state of total willlessness. Not temporary like aesthetic contemplation, but permanent. They've seen through the illusions so completely that the will can no longer operate through them. This is basically what the Buddha described as nirvana. The extinction of craving. The end of suffering through the end of desire. And Schopenhauer thought this was the only real permanent escape. The only way to actually solve the problem instead of just managing it. But he was also realistic about it. He knew that this level of renunciation is basically impossible for most people. It requires a complete transformation of consciousness. It requires giving up everything that makes life livable. It requires a kind of grace or insight, or whatever you want to call it, that almost nobody has. You're not going to become an ascetic monk, neither am I. We have bills to pay, relationships to maintain, bodies that need food and comfort. We're embedded in the world. We can't just withdraw from it without causing harm to ourselves and others. So what Schopenhauer is really offering, for regular people, is a middle path. Not full renunciation, but conscious management. You understand the truth about the will and suffering. You use aesthetic contemplation to get regular relief. You act with compassion to reduce suffering where you can, and you accept that this is the situation. You're trapped, but you have tools. You're suffering, but you have moments of freedom. This is about building a life that acknowledges the darkness without being destroyed by it. That uses the truths Schopenhauer discovered to navigate existence more honestly, more effectively, with less self-deception. So what does that actually look like in practice? First, you stop chasing false solutions. You recognize that self-improvement, achievement, pleasure-seeking, they're all just the will playing games with itself. That doesn't mean you don't work or pursue goals or enjoy things. But you don't expect them to save you. You don't think that if you just get the right job or the right relationship or the right body or the right mindset, you'll finally be happy. You know better. Those things might provide temporary satisfaction, but they won't solve the fundamental problem. They can't. Because the problem is existence itself, consciousness itself, the structure of the will. You can't achieve your way out of that. This recognition is actually freeing. It removes the pressure. You stop blaming yourself for not being happy enough. You stop thinking something's wrong with you because you're not satisfied. Of course you're not satisfied. Satisfaction isn't the default state. Suffering is. You're just experiencing what everyone experiences, what everything experiences. The will grinding. Second, you lower your expectations, not in a defeated way, but in a realistic way. You stop expecting life to be good and start accepting it as it is, which is mostly suffering with occasional breaks. This sounds depressing, but it's actually the opposite of depressing. Depression often comes from the gap between expectation and reality. You expect life to be better than it is, and when it's not, you're disappointed, frustrated, angry. You feel betrayed. Like someone promised you something and didn't deliver. But if you adjust your expectations to match reality, that gap disappears. You're not disappointed when things are hard because you expected them to be hard. You're not crushed when you're not happy because you didn't expect to be happy. And when good things do happen, when you do get moments of genuine pleasure or connection or beauty, they're bonuses, unexpected gifts. You can appreciate them without clinging to them. Third, you build your life around aesthetic contemplation. You make it central, not peripheral. Not something you do when you have time, but something you prioritize. Because these moments are what make the rest of it bearable. This might mean making less money so you have more time for art and nature. It might mean living simply so you don't need as much. It might mean structuring your days around contemplative practice. It might mean choosing where to live based on access to beauty, to museums, to nature, to whatever triggers work for you. The world will tell you this is impractical, irresponsible, selfish, that you should be maximizing productivity, advancing your career, accumulating resources. But that's just the collective will trying to perpetuate itself. It needs you to keep striving, keep consuming, keep feeding the machine. If you've seen through it, if you know that path leads nowhere except more suffering, you can choose differently. You can prioritize the things that actually provide relief. You can build a life that's structured around moments of freedom rather than endless achievement. This doesn't mean checking out completely. You still have responsibilities. You still need to survive, but you can minimize the slavery. You can find the minimum viable participation in the system that allows you to survive while maximizing time for the things that actually matter. The things that provide genuine relief. Fourth, you practice compassion actively. You look for opportunities to reduce suffering, not in some grand save-the-world way, but in small, practical, immediate ways. You see someone struggling, you help if you can. You encounter an animal in distress, you intervene. You have the opportunity to make someone's day a little easier, you take it. Not because you expect reward or recognition, but because you've seen that their suffering is your suffering. Because the separation is illusory. Because compassion is the only response that makes sense once you've understood the truth. And you extend compassion to yourself too. You stop beating yourself up for suffering, for not being better, for not transcending the will through sheer force of effort. You recognize that you're caught in the same trap as everyone else. That your struggles aren't failures, they're just the human condition. And you treat yourself with the same kindness you'd extend to any other suffering being. Fifth, you develop a tolerance for discomfort. You accept that suffering is inevitable and you stop fighting it so hard. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up. It means accepting that pain is part of the package and not adding to it by resisting it constantly. When you're uncomfortable, you notice it, you acknowledge it, but you don't spiral into panic or despair. When you're bored, you sit with it, instead of immediately reaching for distraction. When you're sad or anxious or frustrated, you let yourself feel it without making it mean something catastrophic. This is different from wallowing. It's not indulging in suffering or making it worse. It's just accepting it as what is. The will is grinding, you're experiencing the grind, this is the situation. Fighting it doesn't help, accepting it doesn't make it worse. It might even make it a little more bearable because you're not adding the suffering of resistance to the original suffering. Sixth, you get comfortable with meaninglessness. You stop looking for cosmic purpose or ultimate meaning. You accept that existence is probably pointless, that there's no grand plan, that you're just a temporary configuration of the will that will dissolve back into nothing when you die. This is terrifying for most people. They need meaning. They need to believe their life matters, that they're part of something larger, that it all means something. But Schopenhauer says, that need for meaning is just the will trying to justify itself. It's cope. The truth is probably that there's no meaning, no purpose, no cosmic significance. You're born, you suffer, you die. The will keeps willing. That's it. And accepting that, really accepting it, is liberating. Because it removes the pressure to find meaning, or create meaning, or prove that your life matters. You can just exist. You can have your moments of aesthetic contemplation, your moments of compassion, your moments of whatever pleasure you can find, not because they mean something, but because they're what you have, because they provide relief, because they make the suffering bearable. That's enough. Seventh, you prepare for death consciously. You accept that you're going to die, probably sooner than you'd like, and you make peace with it, not in a morbid way, but in a realistic way. Death is the end of your individual manifestation of the will. Your body will decay, your consciousness will cease, you as a distinct entity will stop existing. And that's fine, that's not tragic. It's just what happens. The will continues in other forms, but you don't. And there's a kind of relief in that. The suffering ends, the grinding stops, you're released. Schopenhauer thought death wasn't something to fear, because what you really are, the will, doesn't die, only your individual form dies. And if you've seen through the illusion of individuality, if you know that you're not really separate from everything else, then death loses its sting. You're just returning to the undifferentiated will, dissolving back into the source. But even if you don't buy that metaphysical argument, accepting death is still valuable. Because the fear of death is one of the major sources of suffering. You spend so much energy trying to avoid it, denying it, pretending it won't happen, and that energy is wasted. Death is coming, you can't avoid it. Accepting it frees up that energy for other things. Eighth, you find your people. You look for others who've seen through the illusions, who understand that the normal path is a trap, who are trying to navigate existence honestly instead of lying to themselves. These people are rare. Most people are asleep, or they're actively invested in the lies because the truth is too scary. But there are others out there who get it, who've read Schopenhauer or the Buddha or whoever and recognize the truth in it, who are trying to build lives around aesthetic contemplation and compassion and honest engagement with suffering. Find them. Connect with them. Build relationships based on shared understanding instead of shared illusions. Because solidarity helps. Knowing you're not alone and seeing the darkness makes it less crushing. You can support each other. Remind each other of the practices when you forget. Share what works. This isn't about creating some kind of pessimist cult. It's just about finding people who can talk honestly about existence without needing to pretend it's better than it is. Who can acknowledge the suffering without trying to fix you or cheer you up or sell you solutions that don't work. Ninth, you maintain discipline. You don't let the darkness become an excuse for giving up or doing harm. You still show up. You still fulfill your responsibilities. You still treat people decently. You still take care of your body and your mind as best you can. Understanding that existence is suffering doesn't give you permission to make it worse. If anything, it increases your responsibility to minimize harm, because you know how bad it is. You know what people are going through. You can't add to that unnecessarily, so you maintain structure. You keep your commitments. You do your work. You show up for the people who depend on you, not because it means something or because you'll be rewarded, but because it's what you can do. It's how you operate within the system while not being completely consumed by it. And 10th, you remember that temporary relief is enough. You don't need a permanent solution. You don't need to completely transcend the will and achieve enlightenment. You just need moments, windows, breaths of air. Aesthetic contemplation gives you that. Compassion gives you that. Accepting the truth gives you that. These things don't solve the problem, but they make it survivable. And surviving is the goal. Not thriving, not optimizing, not becoming your best self. Just surviving with as little suffering as possible and as much relief as you can find. This is the realistic path. The honest path. The path that doesn't promise salvation but offers actual tools for coping with existence. And over time, if you practice this, something interesting happens. The suffering doesn't go away, but your relationship to it changes. You're not as identified with it. You're not as crushed by it. You've created space between you and the grinding of the will. Not permanent space, but enough that you can breathe. You start to recognize suffering as something that's happening, not as what you are. You're the consciousness that's experiencing suffering, not the suffering itself. And that distinction, subtle as it is, makes a difference. You also start to appreciate the moments of relief more deeply, because you're not taking them for granted. You're not expecting them to last. You're fully present for them because you know they're temporary. You know they're precious. You know they're all you've got. And maybe if you're lucky, you develop a kind of dark wisdom, a clear-eyed understanding of what existence is and how to navigate it. You're not optimistic about it. You're not lying to yourself, but you're also not destroyed by it. You've found a way to live with the truth. This is what Schopenhauer's philosophy offers. Not happiness, but clarity. Not salvation, but survival strategies. Not a cure, but palliative care for the chronic illness of existence, and maybe that's enough. Maybe knowing the truth and having real tools is better than believing comforting lies and being disappointed constantly. Maybe seeing clearly even when what you see is dark, is preferable to living in illusion. Because here's the thing. The people who don't understand this, who are still chasing achievement and pleasure and self-improvement, they suffer too. They suffer just as much, maybe more, because they don't know why. They think something's wrong with them. They think they're failing. They blame themselves for not being happy. You know better. You know the suffering is structural. You know it's not your fault. You know everyone experiences it. And that knowledge, even though it's dark, is also freeing. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're just alive. And being alive means suffering. But it also means having access to these moments of beauty, these windows of freedom, these glimpses of what consciousness can be when it's not enslaved to desire. Use them. Build your life around them. Make them your practice, your refuge, your reason for continuing. And remember, you're not trying to escape existence permanently. You're trying to make it bearable. You're trying to find enough moments of relief that you can keep going. That's the goal. That's success. Not transcendence, just survival with moments of grace. Schopenhauer lived to be 72. He spent most of his life alone, bitter about his lack of recognition, paranoid about his safety, difficult to be around. But he also had his books, his music, his poodles, his routines. He had aesthetic contemplation. He had moments of will-less consciousness. And he had the satisfaction of knowing he'd seen the truth and written it down, whether anyone read it or not. Near the end of his life, people finally started paying attention. His books started selling. Younger philosophers and artists started citing him. He got the recognition he'd wanted all along. And apparently, in his final years, he softened a little, got a bit less bitter, enjoyed his fame. He died peacefully, sitting in his chair. The will finally released him. And whatever you believe happens after death, at minimum his suffering ended. The grinding stopped. He was free. That's coming for you too. Eventually, the suffering will end. Your consciousness will cease. The temporary you will dissolve back into whatever it came from. And that's okay. That's not tragic. It's just what happens. But until then, you've got this life, this consciousness, these moments, these tools. The prison is real, but the doors are unlocked sometimes. The suffering is structural, but relief is possible. The will is in control, but you can step outside it temporarily. The darkness is profound, but there are lights flickering in it. Use what Schopenhauer discovered. Make aesthetic contemplation a practice. Develop compassion. Accept the truth without being destroyed by it. Build a life that's structured around moments of freedom rather than endless striving. And know that you're not alone in this. Everyone who's really paying attention, everyone who's seen through the illusions, everyone who's carrying this burden of knowledge, they're all doing the same thing, trying to survive, trying to find relief, trying to make existence bearable. You can do this. You can live with the truth. It's heavy, yeah, but you can carry it. Especially when you know you don't have to carry it alone, especially when you have actual tools that actually work. The suffering is real, the will is relentless. Existence is probably meaningless. You're going to die. Everyone you love is going to die. Most of your life will be some form of dissatisfaction, but also, music exists, art exists, nature exists, beauty exists. Moments of perfect will-less consciousness exist. Compassion exists, understanding exists, the possibility of clarity exists. And for now, while you're still here, still conscious, still trapped in this body with its needs and desires, you have access to all of that. You can use it. You can build a life around it. You can survive this nightmare with grace, with moments of freedom, with an honest understanding of what you're dealing with. That's what Schopenhauer offers you. The truth. And the tools to live with it. Use them well. You're going to need them. This has been the only true escape from your suffering. According to Schopenhauer, Formen here does now, Formen here does now, Formen here does now people some of the twos, Formen here does now passible prophet. A complete exploration of his philosophy of the will, the structural nature of suffering, and the practice of aesthetic contemplation as the accessible path to temporary freedom. You've learned the prison. You've learned the philosophy. You've learned the escape, you've learned the practice, and now you've learned how to live with all of it. The rest is up to you. Find your music. Find your art. Find your nature. Find your moments. Build your practice. Live with the truth. The suffering continues, but so does the possibility of relief. Use it as often as you can, for as long as you can. It's the only true escape you've got.